Good afternoon. My name is Ted Meyerson. I'm a volunteer with AARP Maryland, and we're here today to talk about financial exploitation. We have as a guest Kulisha Hiley, who has been a staff attorney, senior legal services, has been at staff attorney, a single, having trouble, has been a staff attorney at Senior Legal Services for 4.5 years. She works on a wide variety of civil, non-criminal legal cases, though her priority cases are those that involve abuse and exploitation of seniors. So I guess the first question is, what is financial exploitation?
Hello. So in Maryland, financial exploitation is a crime in which a perpetrator uses deception, intimidation, or undue influence to knowingly and willfully obtain the property of an individual that the person knows or reasonably should know is at least 68 years old, with intent to deprive that person of his or her property.
Well, so there's a parameter in there of age?
Yes, and Maryland defines a vulnerable adult, a vulnerable senior, as a person who is at least 68 years old.
Okay, that's vulnerable because of age. What about other vulnerabilities like cognition or whatever?
Yeah, so generally, a vulnerable adult is any person who has issues with handling their typical activities of daily living because of some type of mental deficiency, such as dementia or Alzheimer's or some other mental impairment.
Well, who would take advantage of somebody like that? Who are the perpetrators?
Perpetrators of elder financial exploitation could be anyone. It can be friends, family members, strangers on the internet, strangers who go door to door, potential love interests, or people pretending to be potential love interests. It can even be members or leaders of a person's church. In my experience, the perpetrators of the most egregious cases of financial exploitation are adult children of seniors.
Wow, adult children. My gracious. So they're taking advantage of mom or pop.
Yes, most frequently, that's who I experience as the perpetrators of elder financial exploitation.
Well, do you find that they're doing it out of some necessity or just pure greed? In other words,
The reasons vary. Yeah, the reasons vary. Sometimes it's that they're in a tight spot and they know that mom and dad can help them out. And sometimes they're too embarrassed to just ask, so they help themselves. Sometimes it's that they've been cut off by mom or dad, so they help themselves anyway. But the reasons can vary. I've not come across a trend in reasonings. Like, it can really just be anything.
well, how do they gain access?
Well, it depends on how protective the senior is of themselves. At the end of the day, I gave you the definition of financial exploitation from a Maryland legal standpoint, but generally, financial exploitation is theft, and thieves go where money and valuable assets are. And seniors are viewed as easy targets because there are several factors that make them vulnerable. They have fixed incomes, including Social Security income, pensions. They have saved their entire lives for their retirement. So a lot of them are sitting on a nest egg of cash and valuable assets. And some factors that make them vulnerable include isolation, increased dependency on others for care as their physical health declines. And there are also barriers to reporting to law enforcement and engaging in criminal proceedings against their abusers.
Well, I can understand if I have $5,000 in my desk drawer and my daughter steals it, I get that. But if I have a bank account or it's how do they get access?
So often I see perpetrators of financial abuse are people who had power of attorney.
Okay.
Power of attorney documents are extremely powerful, and they give a broad grant of authority to the agent. The agent under a financial power of attorney steps into your shoes, and they can do anything that you could do with your money and your property as if they were you. They don't need your permission in advance because the document itself is permission for them to manage your finances and manage your property. So oftentimes I see that the power of attorney is being misused, and that's how perpetrators of abuse gain access to seniors' property and money.
That's fascinating. How does somebody get a power of attorney, a financial power of attorney?
So the person has to appoint someone else as an agent. So you can't go and get power of attorney over someone else. Someone has to give you the power of attorney. So what would happen is the senior would go to an attorney or go online and make their own power of attorney, and they would say, I need help with managing my money or managing my property. And they would create the power of attorney document and appoint a person as power of attorney, as the agent. And then from there, the agent has that broad grant of authority to do anything that senior could do with money and property.
I would assume that has to be notarized. Would that be so?
Yes, power of attorneys in Maryland are the only estate planning document that requires notarization.
Do notaries pick up funny things going on?
Notaries usually come in after the document has been prepared. The notary is a person who attests that the person who's signing it is legally the person who they claim to be in the document. So the notary would say, are you the principal to this document? Do you know what this is? Are you doing this willingly? And if the person answers yes, then it'll be notarized.
Okay, so we're back to making bad decisions is not illegal.
Right. Making bad decisions is not illegal. You have a right to make decisions for yourself. The only way that decision-making ability gets taken away is if there's a court-ordered guardianship.
And how often does that happen?
It happens quite often, but Maryland is pretty progressive about guardianships. It's absolutely a last resort for helping seniors with their day-to-day care and managing their finances and property. You have to certify that the senior cannot manage those things on their own before a court will even consider a guardianship petition.
Well, let me ask you this. How do you persuade somebody to report a family member? That seems to me a long haul.
Yes, so that is one of the most difficult things that I face in handling these cases. Often, if the perpetrator of abuse is a family member, especially their adult children, people feel like they should not involve law enforcement. Basically, if you report it to law enforcement, then criminal prosecution is very likely to follow. And people don't want to send their children to jail. They don't want to send close family and friends to jail. So that's one of the barriers that we face quite often. And honestly, the solution to that is to just have a candid conversation with that person. Let them know the seriousness, how severe it is that they're experiencing this wrongdoing, and convince them that the right thing to do is to involve law enforcement if it can't be resolved without law enforcement.
Well, let me ask you this question. Suppose an adult child gets financial power of attorney and thinks the best thing for mom is to buy her a condominium, and uses up all her money, and now she has a problem because all her money's been used up buying the condominium. That's not illegal.
No, that's not illegal, as long as that condominium was purchased with the primary purpose being for mom's housing. With a power of attorney, your financial agent has a duty to refrain from self-dealing, which means that they can't go purchase themselves a condominium using your money.
All right, well, let me ask another question. I know one question leads to another. If if mom goes to the bank and wants to withdraw an unusually large sum of money, you know, $5,000 or $10,000, are bank employees trained to say, "Hey, there's something wrong here"?
Yes. So actually, in Maryland, banks are required to report suspicious activities to Adult Protective Services and law enforcement. So if a bank sees suspicious transactions on an account, so large withdrawals that are made by someone that is not the primary account holder, or if someone is coming into the bank and perhaps being aggressive, or using undue influence to get the person to withdraw money, banks are required to report that, and bank employees are trained on that when they onboard, or at least they should be.
And what would they do in that case? If they just don't do the transaction, or they do the transaction and call the police? What seems to be that procedure?
So different banks handle it differently. Sometimes they'll isolate the account holder and ask them questions. If the account holder gives them permission to go ahead and release the funds, then they'll do it. Sometimes the bank will put a hold on the account so that certain transactions can't go through until an investigation is done. It really just depends on the financial institution.
Can you give us some examples of financial exploitation as used?
Sure. So I have so many of these cases. I'll just explain what happened in one of my cases that was particularly egregious. I had a 82-year-old client who was placed in an assisted living facility after about a year of being exploited by his son. We were contacted, and we learned at that time that pretty much all of his life savings, which was hundreds of thousands of dollars, and his monthly pension and Social Security income were all being intercepted by his son. He placed his father and his mother in an assisted living facility that was really subpar compared to their standard of living that they had before going to that facility. And then the son took the liberty of moving into his father's lavish house. And because he intercepted all of his father's money, his parents didn't have money for medication or their hygiene products. They couldn't pay the assisted living facility that they were in. And when we got involved, we immediately started doing things to stop the exploitation. Like, we revoked the power of attorney that the son was using. We changed the bank information. But this, like I said, this case was particularly egregious. His wife worked in the perpetrator's wife worked in a doctor's office, and they fabricated a capacity assessment, which stated that my client did not have capacity to revoke his power of attorney. So, of course, we had to go back and undo all of that. We had to get a private assessment done, reinstate the revocation of power of attorney. Next thing we know, the house is for sale using the power of attorney that was revoked. So we had to stop the sale of the house. Next thing we know, the bank card was stolen during a visit to the client's assisted living facility, and the son regained access to the bank account. So we we had to go back and change it again. And at that point, the bank account was flagged. And when they went into the branch to try to withdraw money, since they couldn't use the debit card, I was immediately notified, and so was Adult Protective Services. And this went on for quite some time because it was his only surviving son. So he didn't want to report to law enforcement and risk having his son arrested. And ultimately, when we were able to stop the abuse, recover some of the funds that were exploited, the son's parting words were, "Just call me when he dies." And that's the last that we heard from him.
Well, that's quite a horror story. Can you intervene and bring in the law?
So as an attorney, when we engage a client like this, the client is protected by attorney-client privilege, which means that I cannot disclose anything that involves their case without their permission or without a court order that compels me to disclose it. So when he rejected involving law enforcement because he didn't want his son to go to prison, we had to work outside of the box. So sometimes resolving these cases takes some thinking outside of the box, and sometimes it's not just a legal solution. Sometimes we have to do things like contact the bank and make sure that bank accounts are kept private, things like that.
I know that there are a lot of things like spam that goes on, and love spams where people build relationships and then steal money. Does that count as financial exploitation?
Yes, so sweetheart scams are financial exploitation in Maryland, and those are actually prosecutable. So if a person is pretending to be a love interest to gain access to a person's property and money, then they could go to jail for that.
Oh, that's very interesting. What are some of the challenges that older adults face when trying to remedy financial exploitation?
There are so many challenges. In the case that I described a few minutes ago or a few moments ago, that challenge was one that I often see, which is that the remedy for the exploiter's actions is criminal prosecution. And many adults, like my client in that case, already feel alone. So they're hesitant to report abuse to law enforcement or seek criminal prosecution because that means sending their child to prison. I've also seen seniors be shunned by other close family and friends for reporting exploitation because the remedy is criminal prosecution. And another thing to keep in mind is that sometimes the perpetrators of abuse intentionally toe the line with acts of abuse and neglect. To give an example, I once had a case where a couple invited an elderly woman to live with them under the guise that they would help take care of her, considering her declining health. And they made themselves her legal caretaker, which created a duty of care. So they were responsible for ensuring that she had proper shelter, proper food, clothing, toileting, bathing, things like that. And that's exactly what they gave her, but to a bare minimum. So they took her entire Social Security and pension income, and they converted a closet in their home into a very small bedroom that she got to live in. She did get meals. They were the microwave meals from the grocery store instead of the lavish dinners that they had. They purchased her clothing from a local thrift shop, and it was not at all in line with her style. She had quite a fabulous style. She was quite chic. And they kept receipts for everything that they purchased, and the rest usually went towards rent, which they claimed was much more than she had left over after expenses, but they claimed to have waived the difference. So technically, they weren't doing anything illegal, but they saw an elderly woman who had a decent income, and they took advantage of her. And she couldn't afford a private telephone after all of her expenses were paid. So this went on for quite some time, unbeknownst to anyone else, before a social social worker at her doctor's office caught wind of what was happening and reached out to us for help. So sometimes these situations aren't quite illegal, they just toe the line between legality and immorality.
Well, how often does this happen?
This
Not
happens
not the
so frequently.
specific, but the general financial exploitation of seniors.
This happens so frequently, and the reports are very low. There's an estimate from uh, there's an estimate that approximately only 1 in 10 cases are reported. So reporting is very low. And there's no way to track just how often this happens until people reach out. But since banks have been mandated to report suspected abuse, we've been getting a lot more reports of abuse than than we were getting when people were just responsible for reporting it on their own.
Well, if parents are hesitant to put a relative or a child in jail, are there alternatives for them to take? Are there other paths?
So when we intervene, we try to cut off access to the assets that the perpetrator is abusing, and a lot of times we can offer resources to other community resources like counseling, or if the person is abusing their parent because they are in financial need, maybe there are social services that they could benefit from that would lessen the need to depend on their parents so much.
Well, let me ask you a final question. You know, I'm a senior. What can I do to protect myself?
In cases of financial exploitation or abuse in general, vigilance is key to protecting yourself. So don't trust strangers with sensitive personal information. So don't give out your social security number or your driver's license number. Don't trust strangers with your important documents like your birth certificate or your ID. Keep your bank account statements private because those contain account information. If you have guests over, make sure that all of your personal documents, your sensitive documents, are in a secure location that your guests can't access. Also, regularly review your bank and financial account statements, because the sooner you spot exploitation, the easier it is to handle and the less money you lose in the process. Sometimes all of the money you lose cannot be recovered, but the sooner you find out that it's going on, the sooner you can cut that off and avoid losing so much money.
Do you find many of your clients use the internet?
Yes, so I do have a good mix of clients who use the internet. Since all of our clients are older in age, we get about half and half who are comfortable using the internet and half who are not. Those who are comfortable using the internet, I try to warn them about social media scams, email scams, and things like that, because scammers will attack you from whichever way they can get their hands on your property and your money. So if that means contacting you via social media and saying, hey, sign up for this blessing loom that I'm a part of and you'll get all of this money back in the end. Don't trust people that you don't know. Don't trust people who claim to be friends or family members on the internet. If someone reaches out, if a distant cousin reaches out to you on the internet and says, hey, can I borrow some money to do X, Y, and Z? Give that person a call to make sure that that's really who it is, because scammers can also clone social media profiles and scam you that way. So you just have to be very careful.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, and you have been wonderful in your explanations. And I hope that a lot of people have watched this, and I hope they get a lot of information that they can use. Kalisha, thank you very much. And here are some contact phone numbers. for senior legal services, where you can find Kalisha, 410-396-1322. And another number you might want to be aware of is the AARP Fraud Watch Network. You can call them and get some advice, tell them what's going on. They are really a good outfit and someplace you ought to be able to go to if you need help. Their helpline number is 877-908-3360. So again, thank you. This has been great. I look forward to seeing you under better circumstances, Kalisha, where maybe we won't have any more fraud exploitations again. So
I hope
thank
not.
you for being. Bye-bye.